Humans were never the strongest animals. No claws, no fangs, no thick hide or venom. In the face of predators, we were fragile. But we had something else, the ability to imagine that a stone could become more than just a stone. The first tools were not weapons. They were edges, sharp flakes chipped off larger rocks, likely by accident, then by intent. These flakes could cut, scrape, and crack open bone. Homo habilis, one of our earliest ancestors, recognized their value, not because of brute strength, but because of what they could do with their hands. This was the turning point. The mind began reshaping nature. These primitive stone flakes allowed early humans to access new food sources. They could butcher scavenged carcasses, reach marrow, and eventually process their own kills. The shift was profound. The moment humans picked up a sharp stone with purpose, they changed the rules of survival. But when did a tool become a weapon? It wasn't enough to hold a sharp object. At some point, Homo habilis began to strike first, to use stone as a tool for dominance, not just survival. This was not defense. It was offense. The difference is subtle but critical. A weapon implies planning, control, and intent to inflict harm. It suggests a leap in thinking, from reacting to the environment to controlling it. The earliest weapons weren't forged, they were found. Sturdy branches, jagged rocks, heavy bones. Nature provided the raw material. Humans provided the vision. These were not yet refined tools. There was no polishing, no standardization, no special quarries or workshops, but they were functional. A heavy branch could crush a skull, a sharp stone could tear flesh, a fast throw could strike a predator before it reached you, and those who mastered these primitive actions survived. In evolutionary terms, this was the start of an arms race, not between species, but within our own kind. Those who could strike from a distance lived longer. Those who could select better rocks or craft more ergonomic handles had greater chances of feeding themselves, defending their kin, or leading a group. The consequences were immediate. Predators that once hunted us now faced retaliation. Competitors for food and shelter, other hominin groups, or even rival bands of the same species encountered organized resistance. With weapons came territory, and with territory came power. The emergence of weapons introduced asymmetry. No longer did the outcome depend purely on strength, size, or speed. A smaller group with better weapons could dominate a larger one. A single person with the right tool and the right moment could change the outcome of an encounter or even a generation. Bones unearthed at early Paleolithic sites bear the marks of trauma, not caused by animals, but by other humans. Blunt force injuries to the skull, puncture wounds to the ribs, fractures consistent with stone projectiles. These are not random accidents. They are forensic evidence of conflict, of intention, of a growing awareness that control could be achieved through violence, if properly armed. Still, weapons in this era were crude. There was no flint knapping, as we later see in Neanderthals or Homo sapiens. Most tools were unmodified, used as they were found. But even this minimal transformation, the leap from passive observer to active user, was a cognitive milestone. Weapon use also required something else. The body had to adapt to throw, strike, and aim. Evolutionary biologists note that early Homo species developed longer legs, more flexible shoulders, and precision grips, traits that support coordinated attacks. The skeleton itself began changing in response to the demands of combat and hunting. But perhaps the most important transformation was psychological. To use a weapon is to imagine the future, to anticipate danger, envision a target, and prepare. These mental skills, projection, memory, strategy, are part of what defines human intelligence. The weapon, then, is not just a tool. It is a mirror of the mind that made it. This was the beginning of a new kind of survival, strategic, calculated, and technological. The difference between predator and prey began to blur. Homo habilis and later Homo erectus were no longer just reacting to threats. They were creating tools that altered the threat itself. They were becoming proactive, changing not only how they survived, but how they shaped the world around them. Each time a rock was selected for its weight, shape, or edge, that was a choice. Each time a stick was broken to fit the hand better, or a stone flake was used twice instead of once, that was innovation. Over thousands of generations, those decisions accumulated. They became habits, then skills, then traditions. And slowly, the human being began to distinguish itself not by what it was born with, but by what it could create. From that moment on, the future of our species would be written not just in bone and blood, but in stone. Part 2. When weapons created advantage. Neanderthals versus Homo sapiens. Not all weapons are created equal, and not all humans used them the same way. Roughly 300,000 to 40,000 years ago, two human species roamed the Ice Age world, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Both were intelligent, social, and capable of creating tools. But when it came to weapons, the differences were not just technological. They were strategic, anatomical, and ultimately evolutionary. Neanderthal weapons were simple and heavy. The typical weapon was a thick, sharpened wooden spear designed for close-range thrusting. Archaeological evidence from sites across Europe reveals large, pointed wooden shafts, sometimes hardened in fire, with no detachable tip. These were not meant to be thrown from a distance. They were designed to be driven directly into the target, usually large prey, such as bison or mammoths. To wield such weapons, Neanderthals needed to be physically powerful, and they were. Dense bones, robust muscle attachments, and short limbs made them effective grapplers, ideal for close encounters. But the very nature of their weapons forced them into dangerous proximity with their prey. One misstep could be fatal. Homo sapiens took a different approach. Their spears were lighter, sharper, and more sophisticated. A stone or bone point was often hafted to a shaft, fixed with resin, sinew, or plant fiber. These detachable tips allowed greater penetration and less breakage. Most importantly, they were designed to be thrown, enabling sapiens to kill from a distance. Later, Homo sapiens developed atlatls, spear throwers, and eventually the bow and arrow, a transformative leap in prehistoric warfare and hunting. These tools provided range, accuracy, and safety, and reduced the risk of injury during hunts. Neanderthal strategy relied on brute strength and direct engagement. There is evidence suggesting group hunts, ambushes, and coordinated attacks, but always within tight range. Their weapons dictated their tactics. Homo sapiens, by contrast, operated with mobility, coordination, and advanced planning. Their lighter bodies and more refined throwing tools allowed for hit-and-run tactics. They could surround, trap, and strike prey without entering harm's reach. This shift in strategy did more than improve hunting. It reshaped social behavior, creating a greater need for cooperative communication, timing, and roles within the group. The hunt became a choreography of movement and decision-making, not just raw power. Weapon development is not just a technical achievement, it reflects a neurological transformation. Producing a hafted spear or a bow involves multi-step planning, selecting materials, shaping components, assembling them with adhesive, testing and refining. These actions engage the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, foresight, and innovation. Brain scans of modern humans show that fine motor skills and tool use stimulate the same regions used in language and reasoning. This suggests that the mental processes behind weapon making may have also accelerated abstract thinking, storytelling, and social learning. In essence, the weapons sapiens used not only protected their bodies, they rewired their brains. One of the most significant inventions in human prehistory was the bow and arrow. Emerging at least 70,000 years ago, possibly earlier, this innovation altered the rules of survival. With a bow, a hunter could stand hidden, silent, and still, releasing a projectile with deadly force almost silently. The prey never saw it coming. Neither did enemies. The bow represents a cognitive threshold, unlike thrusting spears or hand axes. It involves understanding stored energy, trajectory, and elastic properties of materials, abstract concepts rooted in physics and anticipation. No longer was success based on proximity. With distance came dominance. The impact of these innovations went far beyond the battlefield or hunting ground. The sapiens who used bows and advanced spears had higher survival rates, fewer injuries, and greater food security. This allowed for population growth. More food meant more children survived. Longer lifespans, fewer fatal injuries led to more elders, craft specialization. Some individuals began focusing entirely on toolmaking, leading to technological acceleration. Meanwhile, Neanderthals, despite their intelligence and adaptability, did not make this leap. Their tools remained relatively static. Their weapons did not evolve in the same direction. Their populations remained small and fragmented. In a world where competition grew sharper, sapiens shared techniques, improved upon failures, and passed on refinements across generations and across continents. This cultural resilience, tied directly to weapon technology, became a major force in human dominance. It's easy to focus on the object, the spear, the bow, the stone blade, but the real story is the group that made it. Sapiens developed role-based societies: hunters, crafters, tool repairers, teachers, scouts. This diversity of responsibility increased efficiency and innovation. It also solidified social bonds. Weapons weren't just for survival. They became markers of skill, intelligence, and social value. A well-crafted spear tip might be traded. A finely balanced bow might become a status symbol. A master crafter became an asset, protected, respected, and listened to. This shift redefined what power meant in early human societies. Not the strongest, but the smartest led. Weapons began as tools to hunt and defend. But for Homo sapiens, they became something more. A platform for cognitive growth, social complexity, and evolutionary success. The edge wasn't just in the blade, it was in the mind that made it. Art 3, the beginning of war, strategy, geography, and control. Weapons were never just for hunting. As soon as humans could kill more efficiently, they also began to compete, not just with animals, but with each other. With the rise of advanced tools and projectile weapons, Homo sapiens started expanding beyond their traditional range. No longer bound to isolated resource zones, they moved into new territories: open grasslands, fertile valleys, caves, and riverbanks. These spaces were not empty. Others already lived there. And that's when strategy became survival. In early human groups, who held the weapon held the authority. The person with the spear was not just a hunter. They were also the protector, the enforcer, the leader. As weapons improved in range and accuracy, it became possible to coordinate actions across greater distances and within larger groups. This is where we see the first signs of battlefield logic. Roles became differentiated. There were throwers, those who attacked from range; lurers, individuals who flushed prey or enemies from hiding; guards, posted to watch the flanks or protect the rear. This level of role distribution suggests advanced planning, memory, and communication. It marks the beginning of organized conflict, both with other species and with rival human bands. Weapons did not evolve in isolation. They were shaped by the landscape. In regions with abundant hardwoods and sharp stone, tools became more complex. Fire-hardened spears with detachable stone tips were only possible where materials and knowledge intersected. On open plains, long-range weapons like throwing spears, atlatls, and eventually bows were advantageous. They allowed attacks from a distance with clear lines of sight. In dense forests, shorter weapons and ambush tactics worked better. Speed and maneuverability mattered more than range. This tight feedback loop between environment and technology drove regional variation in weapon design. Different climates produced different tools and different styles of violence. The archaeological record is unambiguous. Conflict between human groups was real. Fractured skulls, embedded spear tips, and arrow wounds in skeletons all testify to interpersonal violence. These injuries were not the result of accidents or hunting mishaps. They show clear patterns of aggression, many consistent with frontal attacks or surprise strikes. Why were these groups fighting? The answer is simple: resources. Shelter. Caves were warm, dry, and defensible, but limited. Water. Fresh water sources were essential and often contested. Hunting grounds. Large prey migrated seasonally. Groups positioned themselves accordingly, leading to territorial overlap. The expansion of Homo sapiens inevitably brought them into direct competition with other humans, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other Homo sapiens groups. Violence became a tool, not just of survival, but of territorial enforcement. The logic was harsh but effective. Eliminate the rival group, and the land is yours. Natural selection doesn't favor the strongest. It favors the most adaptable. And in this period, the most adaptable groups were those with the best weapons. Not only were better armed bands more successful in hunting, but they were also less vulnerable to surprise attacks, more capable of intimidation, and more likely to disperse rivals without direct confrontation. In this new landscape, victory didn't depend on physical strength. It depended on weapon quality, tactical intelligence, group coordination, knowledge of terrain. Weapons were the great equalizer, but also the great divider. Once introduced, they created asymmetries of power that shifted balance across regions and over generations. Initially, early humans likely used weapons defensively to protect themselves from predators, raiders, or wild animals. But at some point, a shift occurred. Groups began using weapons not just to repel threats, but to eliminate them before they materialized. This marked the beginning of offensive warfare. Instead of waiting for rivals to encroach, bands of Homo sapiens began to track other groups' movements, anticipate conflicts, launch preemptive strikes. Tactics became more complex. Attacks occurred at dawn or under cover of darkness. Ambushes were planned near waterholes, migration routes, or known campsites. This was no longer survival in reaction. It was strategic domination. The hunter had become the conqueror. As groups expanded their reach and solidified control over territory, weapons became instruments of social order. Leadership began to depend not only on charisma or age, but on tactical ability, craftsmanship, and combat reputation. Those who knew how to make superior weapons, or who demonstrated effective use of them, often became leaders or advisors. Knowledge became currency, and weaponry became infrastructure. Some communities began to stockpile tools, establish specialized roles, or even defend strategic resource zones, such as flint outcrops or freshwater springs. This was the foundation of something new: proto-political structure. Control of weapons meant control of land, and control of land meant power. Homo sapiens didn't just out-hunt their rivals, they out-fought them and out-planned them. The weapon was no longer just an extension of the hand, it was the expression of group will, memory, and future planning. War, in its earliest form, was not about destruction for its own sake, but about securing advantage in an unforgiving world. The age of strategy had begun. Part 4. The rise of the makers, weapons, and social structure. Weapons changed how early humans hunted, fought, and survived. But just as importantly, they changed how people related to each other. In the beginning, the one who used the weapon was important, but soon, the one who made the weapon became even more essential. In early human groups, hunting was crucial, but you couldn't hunt without the right tools, and tools didn't appear by accident. Behind every successful hunt, every defensive stand was someone who knew how to shape stone, bind wood, select materials, and repair damage. Without the toolmaker, the group was vulnerable. The ability to produce effective weapons became a life or death skill, and those who possessed it were no longer just helpers. They became indispensable. As weapons became more complex, early humans began to divide tasks in more structured ways. There were craftsmen, those who shaped stone, wood, and bone into tools; hunters, those who used these tools in the field; instructors, older individuals who passed down knowledge and techniques. This wasn't casual cooperation. It was the emergence of specialization, a foundational step toward modern social systems. Archaeological evidence shows signs of designated tool-making areas in ancient campsites, clusters of discarded flakes, worn tools, and workspaces separate from living quarters. These were the first workshops, and with workshops came apprenticeships. Knowledge didn't just pass by watching, it began to transfer systematically. Skill became a lineage. Not all weapons were equal. Some were sharper, stronger, better balanced. Some had carefully hafted handles, stronger bindings, or better aerodynamic design. A well-made spearhead could be the difference between feeding a group for days or returning empty-handed. Because of this, high-quality weapons became trade items. Arrowheads and spear points have been found hundreds of kilometers from their material sources, suggesting not only mobility, but exchange. These were just tools. They were currency and often symbols of status. Some weapons even bore markings, not decorations, but identifiers. Engravings on stone tools, patterns on bone handles, even pigment traces, all pointing to ownership, clan identity, or craft origin. Weapons began to represent more than survival. They embodied value, identity, and connection. The act of crafting a weapon required more than dexterity. It demanded planning, memory, and innovation. To make a complex spear or arrow involved selecting the right stone, such as flint or obsidian, knapping the stone to create a sharp edge, attaching it to a shaft using resin, sinew, or fibers, testing, adjusting, and refining the design. This multi-step process could not be improvised in a crisis. It required foresight and a community that valued technical expertise. Weapon making became a group investment. A tribe that produced good weapons survived longer, expanded farther, and dominated rivals. As a result, technology became collective intelligence. The ability to design and share improvements in weapons triggered parallel growth in communication, language, and memory systems. Each refinement had to be remembered, taught, and improved again. This loop, create, share, refine, became the basis of cultural progress. In earlier societies, strength may have determined leadership, but as weapon design advanced, a shift occurred. Power moved toward those who could innovate. Groups with skilled toolmakers expanded territory more efficiently. Their hunts were more productive, their defenses more reliable. Their influence and their population grew. This created early social hierarchies not based on brute force, but on intellectual capital. The toolmaker became a central figure. Often older, with years of accumulated knowledge, they were protected and respected. They may not have thrown the spear, but they gave it life. And with this respect came authority. It was no longer just the warrior who commanded attention. It was also the one who knew how to build and teach others to build. Weapons were no longer just about what they could do, but what they represented: knowledge, skill, prestige, and power. They became some of the earliest cultural artifacts, bridging the gap between technology and identity. The rise of the weapon maker was not a side story in human evolution. It was central. When humans began to assign value to knowledge, to elevate those who could create, not just destroy, they laid the groundwork for civilization itself. Every modern society, every economy, every institution that values expertise over brute force carries the legacy of that shift. The blade may have won the battle, but the hand that shaped it won the future. Part 5: The Legacy of Weapons, from bows to cognitive missiles. The story of human weapons did not end in the Stone Age. It never stopped. From simple bows to ballistic missiles, human beings have continued to invent, refine, and escalate the tools of force and control. But behind every new weapon lies a deeper constant, a way of thinking. The true legacy of weapons is not the spear or the gun. It is the mindset that created them. Human history is a timeline of weaponry. Bows and arrows extended reach. Spears and pikes increased precision. Crossbows and guns amplified power. Tanks, drones, and nuclear weapons extended destruction to unimaginable scales. But these tools are not random escalations. They follow a consistent pattern. Observe the environment, identify a need, manipulate matter, and shape it into an extension of intent. Whether flint or uranium, every weapon is the physical outcome of human cognition. Weapons evolve because the mind evolves, constantly seeking more efficient, more effective, and more strategic methods of control. What separates humans from other tool-using animals is not just the ability to use a stick. It's the ability to imagine what the stick could become. This is abstract thinking. The process goes like this. See an object, a stone, a branch, a piece of bone. Envision a function, cutting, piercing, projecting force. Modify the object to fulfill that imagined purpose. This ability to mentally simulate outcomes and reverse engineer the tool is what makes weapon making a cognitive event, not just a physical one. It's planning, it's future thinking, it's symbolic association. And it all began the moment someone picked up a rock, not to build, but to defend, to hunt, or to conquer. We no longer live in caves, but we still live in a world organized by those who control tools of force. From political power to global influence, the pattern remains: those who invent new technologies shape the battlefield. Those who control distribution influence society. Those who master application dominate geopolitics. Weaponization has expanded beyond warfare. Information can be weaponized. Economics can be weaponized. Algorithms can be weaponized. The mental framework of turning ideas into tools of control still defines modern civilization. And that framework has deep prehistoric roots, beginning with those who first chipped flint with purpose. Before weapons, humans were vulnerable. We were prey. We had poor claws, slow speed, and fragile skin. Large predators, saber-toothed cats, cave hyenas, giant bears, could kill us easily. Early humans relied on caution, avoidance, and numbers to survive. Then came weapons. A thrown spear could wound from a distance. A fire-hardened point could pierce thick hide. Traps, coordinated ambushes, and projectile weapons gave humans the edge, and over time, flipped the hierarchy. We went from hunted to hunter, and then from hunter to dominant species. Weapons allowed us not just to survive, but to restructure the food chain, placing ourselves firmly at the top. This shift was not physical. It was cognitive. The invention of weapons was a mental upgrade with ecological consequences. But even in early times, there were limits. Archaeological evidence suggests that some weapon-related injuries were non-lethal and healed. Embedded spear points in rib bones, cracked skulls with signs of recovery. This indicates something unexpected: restraint. If early humans were purely violent, these wounds would have been fatal. Instead, we see evidence of survival, care, and possibly even forgiveness. This points to an emerging sense of ethics. Weapons gave us the power to kill, but also forced us to decide when not to. In that moment, violence became more than instinct. It became a question, a decision, a social negotiation. The capacity for destruction now required rules, values, and shared understanding. This was the start of law, morality, and mutual restraint, born from the same cognitive systems that invented the weapons themselves. Today, when you pick up a kitchen knife, use a hammer, or even press a button to activate a machine, you're reenacting a mental pattern formed hundreds of thousands of years ago. You are taking an object, identifying a purpose, and applying controlled force. This is the same logic that shaped the spear, the arrowhead, the musket, and the missile. It's a form of thinking that lives in every human culture, across every continent and every era. It is not the object that matters most. It is the mind that transforms it. The legacy of weapons is not violence. It is intent made physical. It is the ability to project thought into matter, to anticipate danger, to prepare, and to adapt. It is how we stopped reacting to nature and began shaping it. And that legacy is not buried in the past. It is alive in every engineered tool, every designed interface, every strategic plan. From prehistoric spears to modern software, the logic remains. Humanity did not simply survive because we were clever. We survived because we turned cognition into action and action into advantage. Weapons were the first manifestation of that principle. The weapon was never just in the hand, it was in the mind.